Hi there, welcome to another tutorial. And what I want to do this time is I want to paint a huge whale. And well, about a year or two ago I made a very huge drawing in charcoal of this magnificent animal. And now I'm going to make a little painting out of it with the watercolor. As a paper I use the Arches watercolor paper, and I do the setup with a simple mechanical pencil. It's a graphite pencil HB, and I need this first sketch to know where to place the pigments of the watercolor, of course. And you can see the tiny eye. It's a huge animal. But because it's in the water, it moves around very gracious through the water of the ocean. And I thought this pose of the whale is just magnificent. Its tail is all the way up, high up, and this whale is diving downwards into the deep of the ocean. So what we get, and what you can already see in the drawing that I made, is that the lower part of the painting will be much darker and the top will be much lighter because of the sun shining through the water. And I also want to put in some dynamic lines in the water to get some action going. Now that I have my first setup in graphite, I can pick up the pigments, and I'm using a little bit of ultramarine blue and a little bit of yellow, and together they make a nice greenish blue, nice cold color. And I go around the whale. And should you want to see the whole process in real time, you want to paint along with me one-on-one, then you can find me on my Patreon page if you want to draw along or support me there. So what I did is I covered the whole area with a blue layer, and now the whole paper is wet. And I'm going to apply an even darker blue, and I mixed the blue with the Pines gray. And this is the wet in wet technique, which is of course ideal for drawing water and the deep of the ocean. And you can see the difference quite good now. The lower part of my painting is much darker than the top part. I carefully go around the whale because the whale will be of a different color, and the water should be a real cold color, and the whale will be a little bit more warmish gray. And the highest top of my painting, I put in a little bit of yellow, and you can see the pigments traveling through the water. You can tilt your sheet a little bit and steer them around if you want. It's always a little bit of a surprise where the pigments will land, but you can stir them around a little bit. I'm using a paper towel to steer the pigments around a little bit, and that's great fun to do. I use it to get some movement in the water. The water is spinning around the big fish, and a whale isn't a fish, it's a mammal, but the big whale. And while the surrounding of the whale is drying, I can already put in the lines on the belly. And what we also see are those, well, the kind of chicken pox. They are around the front paws, the actual flippers, the big flippers. And they are also on the lower part of the belly. You can see them here, the chicken pox. And I'm using the tip of my brush here to put those in. And well, we need a little bit of detail, of course. And the whale, of course, is swimming around, so I do not want to get too much harsh lines. I want to keep the fish or the whale, I mean, floating around, and I want to keep movement, so it all can be done with the tip of your brush. And now that the water area is drying up, I can put in the color of the whale itself. You do not want the colors of the whale touching the surrounding too much, because they will then blend together. So I'm careful about that. And for the whale itself, I'm using a little bit of light ochre and a little bit of blue, and together they make a nice gray. And wow, just see how that dries up again. And I always keep in mind that watercolor always dries up lighter. When it's wet, it's still quite dark, but once it's dried up, it's always lighter. So now it's time for a second layer underneath the whale. And as you can see, I'm daring. I'm putting in a lot of Pines Gray and leaving some parts a little bit out to get to keep some movement in the water. And the back flipper will have to be darkened up too. This is the area where the water starts to become lighter, and I paint in some swirls, swirling water, and that's a very nice effect to it, of course. Just put that over the actual first sketch drawing lines. This is still the wet in wet technique. I'm putting in some dark pigments, see how they will travel in the still wet paper here. And I also want some water bubbles coming from the beak. And this is the hind flipper. I'll make that a little bit darker. Also the underneath of the belly. There's a lot of shadow going on there, so by simply putting in layers of pigments, you can easily and easy go darker and darker as your painting processes. You can see the tiny eye. It's looking right at us, so that's a nice effect. And I'm putting in a little bit more red over the mid area of the whale. I'm easing down the yellow a little bit, so I get a nicer gray, more purple-ish gray. Nice swirls of water here. Going to the tail flippers there, and they can use a lot of shadow too. We are watching underneath the tail flippers, so they catch a lot of shadow there. This is also nice contrast to get that tail. put in a little bit of more dark contrast. I also put in some swirls of water here. It's more greenish on top. A little bit of that azure color of ocean water where the sun is shining through. So that's a nice effect. I love these animals, they are very beautiful. And for the top of the head I put in a little bit of white gouache. And the white gouache goes together with watercolor paper, watercolor paint very nicely. They're like brother and sister. You can see it here in the water too. I just put in some flares of white gouache, drip it in a little bit. They just travel around in the pigments and in the wet paper. It's very nice to see how that gouache works together. And this is my white jelly roll pen. Once the paper is dried, you can use the white jelly roll pen for some little nice detail, the chicken pox and maybe a little bit in the water. I'm putting in a little bit of extra gouache on the body and here on those lines underneath the beak. Well, here the paper is still a little bit wet, but trying to put in some water lines here with the white jelly roll pen, like sparkles of sunlight hitting the surface of the water. And here for the tail fins I also put in a little bit of extra pigments. Not too sharp edges. I want the whale to be moving around, so I'm avoiding sharp lines. And then that's it. It's my study. Love it. The watercolor is very, very nice for, of course, painting these magnificent animals. So if you want to see the whole one-on-one recording, you can find that on my Patreon page, of course. Or maybe you want to support me there, please do. I will see you again in a next tutorial, so thank you for watching.